Okay, so I am here with the winners of the 2009 Polaris Music Prize, Up, a Toronto hardcore band. And if you guys could just introduce yourselves for the camera.
My name is Damien, aka Pink Eyes, and I'm the singer of Up.
My name is Jonah, aka Mr. Joe, and I play the drums.
And I'm Josh, aka Gulag, play guitar.
Awesome. So the first thing I wanted to ask you guys was, before this year's Polaris came around, did you have any particular opinions or thoughts about the prize overall?
Yeah, right from the get-go, when Final Fantasy won the first year, I knew it was like a pretty awesome prize. Because I think Owen, not just because he played with us last night, but I think he's a true musical virtuoso. And he made a record that was challenging enough that it wasn't the type of record that would get awarded a typical award. So I knew, right off the bat, and I think consistently, even if I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the type of music, I can definitely appreciate the records that have been nominated and the records that have won.
Yeah.
I think as a precedent, the word that would come to mind, considering our own involvement in the Polaris, would have been unattainable.
Yeah.
It's actually quite shocking, and not necessarily just in a humble way, in a legitimately surprising way.
Yeah, I think all of us, with the exception of Sandy, because we had a pool and she bet that effed up with him. Yeah, all of us bet paint on or drove plastic.
The other thing I know about the Polaris is the epic of the awards is so much better than any other show you can imagine.
It's very
go on their website, the 11 people who picked the winner, all the people who picked the short list, and they're just really upfront about the way that it works, and that's cool, because most things that are glamour or gala style in the music industry are just all behind the scenes.
Yeah. You're who picks this? Who?
At least you know who to hate now. There's 11 people from across the country.
And all their email addresses.
All their names, all their emails, you know exactly what they look like.
Get them fired from the job.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because I know, some people right before you guys were announced were kind of oh, if Effed Up won, it would be this total shocker.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, from your perspective, other than the presence of flute on the album, which seems to be repeatedly cited as you should check these guys out.
I should say, for all the flute talk, it's my mom who plays on the record, so just acknowledge her publicly. She anonymously gets acknowledged so much. So hi, Mom.
Polaris mom. But what do you guys think the Gallaghers heard or saw in your album that compelled them to choose it?
I don't know. I'm not. That's not false modesty, but I have a real. I think. People have asked me if you think this is validation. I'm absolutely. If someone was your record's terrible, I'd probably be really? Okay, it's terrible. Now they're oh, it's really good. I'm yeah. Oh, really? It's really good. Okay. So it's kind of that thing about I know pornography when I see it. That famous quote. I know art when someone else tells me it's art. When someone's it's a great piece of art, I'm absolutely.
I completely agree. 100%.
Thank you for telling me out my opinion, and I'm very thankful for that.
Do you feel like this is a crossover moment for Toronto hardcore?
Pardon?
Do you feel like it's a crossover moment for Toronto hardcore?
If this is the new crossover, it's going to be an interesting next 10 years. I mean, go back in time to 1987. I don't think Sergeant D and the SOD would ever have thought that this was their successor. So.
I hope not. I hope it's not a crossover. I mean,
yeah.
All I can think of is we were at this festival in Portland, Oregon this weekend, and the Get Up kids were there and going around being we're so sorry for all the bands that we spawned. And I kind of feel I don't really want Effed Up to spawn bands. I was oh, that's kind of lame what they're saying, but if we made hardcore crossover and people started taking after us, I think it would be a disaster.
Well, the great thing is that we'll always be one step removed from influence because we're such a confusing, difficult band to copy, so I feel like we've scattered the breadcrumbs well enough that it's just going to leave people.
I hope
crossover.
I hope we influence Can Rock and not influence art.
That's very good. That's a good statement.
I hope the one thing that comes out of it is people actually go back and check out some of these amazing bands that meant so much to us as people growing up you know, a lot of these bands that go, you know, kind of like unjustifiably ignored. You know, like a band like the Valtones, who, you know, like I've talked about this math equation, but the Valtones, the Bad Brains just cover the Valtones. The Valtones were the number one influence on the early Bad Brains stuff. The Bad Brains begat the Beastie Boys. The Beastie Boys begat most of the pop culture from the 90s. So, you know, it's kind of like you can trace that back, and you're like, wow, the Valtones were really significant to music, but you don't really hear about them. Like, they certainly don't have a star on the Canada Walk of Fame over there, you know. And, you know, or this year, Loverboy winning the Lifetime Achievement Juno, not Teenage Head, you know. Like, I hope if anything that comes out of this, I hope some of these amazing bands that inspired us get some acknowledgement.
I kind of said this regrettably in maybe a pompous way on John Gomez's show, but something like this is a validation of the difference between like the genre and the content.
Yeah.
And so to add to what Damien is saying, there is a really big difference, and the genre that we're a part of or that we were birthed from is, you know, justifiably maligned in in many senses. It's like the sort of slam, spit, cut your hair, kill your mom attitude. It's like a great spur against like a big number of invaders. But if there's tons of content there and tons of important music, important thoughts that have happened over the years. I mean, and that Bad Brains analogy is remarkable, especially considering it's coming from a Canadian act. So
yeah, exactly. A Canadian act that released 2 7-inches, 1 live 12-inch, and that's all they ever put out. You know, and you know, they really didn't tour that much. They played New York a couple times, and that was about it. And yet, still their record is that significant, you know, to pop culture history.
Yeah.
You know, and it's still like Thurston Moore when the Red Cross opened for Sonic Youth at the Great Hall. Thurston Moore was saying on stage, like, Steve Leckie around, bring me Steve Leckie from the Valtones, you know. And when Henry Rollins came here, we were talking to him, and we were just talking about the Valtones the whole time, you know. Like, and it's
in fact, that was when he perked up.
Yeah, he hated us until we talked about the Valtones.
Yeah, he was more interested in talking to our shoelaces.
Yeah, but so like, you know, and that's what I hope happens. But that's like, and it's not just, you know, punk or hardcore. It's like metal too. Like, there's a lot of incredible Canadian metal bands. Like, I think that Anvil documentary is getting a lot of light shed on it, but maybe not necessarily the most positive light.
Yeah.
But there's some great, like, you know, Canadian Slaughter, you know, Blasphemy, Voivod. Voivod gets a little bit of credit internationally.
Well, Way has his own book now.
You're running on it.
No, I'm loving it.
Okay, good. I can pontificate forever about stereotypical records.
Josh,
It's Damien
sounds
Dave
like
Brown.
Listing off all the Canadian metal bands. I think we just straight away.
when Josh
Ongoing
is not
history
guitar,
of
he's got
new
really long
Canadian-
canes to pull Damien on stage, just in case.
Well, okay, following from that, you guys were talking about the content of the music. What do you think that you're trying to say about either Toronto or Canada through your music? Like, what portrait do you think you're painting?
I think, well, part of it relates to, this is not the all-encompassing answer, but I feel that Canada, being in such close proximity to the States, and the States being such a focus, Canada has kind of the status of the other, and our content definitely has the status of the other, even within our own genre. So I think that's in a very roundabout way, that's a Canadian statement, sort of an identity as an other, and not necessarily the focal point.
Yeah, in Canada, like, you know, in Canada we tend to identify ourselves by what we're not in comparison to the United States. And I think with our band, we kind of identify ourselves by what we're not, you know, like, well, we're a hardcore band, but we're not, like, that fast, and we're not, like, that heavy, but, you know, our vocals are not that melodic, so it's like...
It's just 82 minutes of negative space.
Exactly.